The lights dimmed automatically at what the station's clock called evening, but He-Jin barely noticed. He sat at his desk in the main archive room of Frost's library, carefully turning the pages of an old book. The book was special, a very old copy of A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. The paper felt fragile under his fingers as he worked. Through the large window next to his desk, he could see countless stars. Tiny ice crystals floated past the glass, making it look like it was snowing in space. The station's builders had chosen this spot because the nearby star created these ice crystals naturally. They thought it would help keep the books safe, like a giant freezer in space. He-Jin looked at his computer screen, where he was making a perfect copy of each page. He had been doing this job for 5 years now, turning old books into computer files so everyone could read them. The station's quiet halls and empty rooms had become his home, even if it was a lonely one. "Time check," he said out loud. The station's computer answered in a friendly voice. "It is 7:30 p.m., Earth Standard Time, December 23rd, 2257. Would you like me to start the evening temperature adjustment?" "Yes, please," He-Jin replied. He wrapped his warm sweater tighter around himself as the station began its night cycle. The temperature would drop a few degrees to help preserve the books better. As he worked, He-Jin thought about the Christmas holidays approaching. Back on Earth, people would be getting ready for celebrations. Here, nearly 50 light years from home, Christmas was just another day of careful work with his precious books. He picked up his cup of tea, now cold from sitting too long. The steam had long ago stopped rising from it, just like his memories of celebrating holidays with family have faded. His parents had been surprised when he took this job so far from Earth, but they understood his love for books and history. The archive room was huge, with shelves that reached up toward the high ceiling. Millions of books from Earth's history sat in perfect order on these shelves. He-Jin knew many of them by heart now. Sometimes, late at night, he would walk through the quiet aisles and read the titles, letting his fingers brush against the spines of books that had survived centuries. "Computer," he said, "play some background music, something appropriate for the season." Soft piano music began to play, an old Christmas song that He-Jin remembered from his childhood. As he listened, he carefully turned another page of the Dickens book. The words, "Marley was dead," to begin with, looked back at him from the yellowed paper. A small smile crossed his face as he thought about how Dickens would react if he could see his book here, floating in space among the stars. Would he believe that people still read his stories, even this far from London? Would he be happy to know that his words about kindness and hope still mattered after all these years? He-Jin's scanner beeped softly, showing that it had finished copying another page. The digital version would join the millions of other books in the station's computer system, ready to be sent to any colony or ship that wanted to read it. Outside the window, the ice crystals continued their endless dance. The station's lights reflected off them, creating tiny rainbows that seemed to float in the darkness of space. It was beautiful, in a lonely sort of way, like a snow globe that someone had forgotten on a shelf. He-Jin stretched and stood up from his desk. He needed to check the temperature readings in the other archive rooms before he could finish for the night. As he walked through the quiet halls, his footsteps echoing slightly, he didn't know that in just a few hours, his peaceful routine would change completely. The universe, it seemed, had other plans for this Christmas season. He-Jin was about to close his book for the night when a sharp beeping sound filled the archive room. The noise was so unexpected that he nearly dropped the old Dickens volume. Red lights flashed on his computer screen, something that hadn't happened in all his years on the station. "Computer, what's happening?" he asked, placing the book carefully on its stand. "Incoming transmission detected," the computer replied. "Origin: unregistered vessel approaching from Sector 7. Signal strength unusual." He-Jin moved quickly to his main screen. In 5 years, only scheduled supply ships had ever visited the archive station, but the dot moving across his screen wasn't following any of the usual routes. The computer crackled with static, and then a clear voice came through. Frost's Library Station. This is Captain Jai-yun of the research vessel Star Chaser, requesting emergency docking permission. He-jin sat up straighter in his chair. The voice sounded urgent but controlled. This is Frost's Library. I'm He-jin, Chief Archivist. What's the nature of your emergency? We're carrying sensitive cargo that needs immediate preservation, Captain Jai-yun replied. Historical artifacts from Earth, recovered from a derelict transport. One item in particular. Well, you won't believe it until you see it. He-jin checked the ship's readings on his screen. The Star Chaser was small, about the size of a regular research vessel. Its power levels looked normal, and it carried the right codes to prove it was a human ship. Send me your ship's details, he said, following standard procedure. As the information appeared on his screen, he noticed something interesting. The Star Chaser was supposed to be mapping a star system 3 sectors away. What were they doing here? Cargo details incoming, Captain Jai-yun said. The file that appeared on He-jin's screen made his eyes widen. Among the listed items was something that couldn't possibly be real. Writing desk. Confirmed origin. Charles Dickens, circa 1843. He-jin looked at the Dickens book still sitting on his scanning stand, then back at the screen. The timing seemed impossible, too perfect to be just chance. Captain, he said, trying to keep his voice steady, did you say you have Charles Dickens' actual desk? Recovered from the wreck of the colonial transport Damascus, she confirmed. Along with other artifacts from the London Museum ship, we need your preservation facilities to keep them safe. The computer chimed in. Ship scan complete. No threats detected. Docking clearance recommended. He-jin took a deep breath. His quiet night of scanning books was about to become much more interesting. Computer, begin docking procedures. Captain Jai-yun, you have permission to dock at Bay 3. Through the window, He-jin watched as the Star Chaser came into view. It was covered in a thin layer of space frost, making it look like it had flown through a snowstorm. The ship moved carefully toward the docking bay, its running lights reflecting off the ice crystals that always surrounded the station. As the ship drew closer, He-jin quickly tidied his work area and checked the environmental controls. The preservation rooms were ready for new artifacts, their temperature and humidity perfectly controlled. But his mind kept coming back to one thought. What were the chances that this ship would arrive just as he was digitizing a Dickens book? The station shook slightly as the Star Chaser locked into place at the docking bay. He-jin heard the machinery working as the airlocks connected and pressures equalized. Soon he would meet Captain Jai-yun and her crew, and see if this mysterious desk was really what they claimed it was. Little did he know that this unexpected arrival would turn his quiet archive station into the center of something far stranger than a simple historical discovery. The doors to Docking Bay 3 opened with a soft hiss. He-jin watched as 4 people entered the archive station's main hall. Captain Jai-yun led the group, her uniform neat despite their long journey. She was shorter than He-jin had expected, but her presence commanded attention. Behind her walked a tall man with a serious expression, who introduced himself as Ta-won, the ship's engineer. He carried several scanning devices and kept looking at their readings with concern. Next came 2 crew members carefully guiding a hovering transport platform. On it sat an old wooden desk, its surface marked with age and covered by a protective field. This is Young Me, our historian, Captain Jai-yun said, gesturing to the woman monitoring the desk's environmental controls. She's been studying the artifacts since we found them. He-jin nodded politely to each person, but his eyes kept returning to the desk. Even under the protective field, he could see that it was beautifully made. Dark wood gleamed softly in the station's lights, and intricate carvings decorated its edges. The readings are unusual, Ta-won said, frowning at his scanner. The energy signature keeps changing. It's like nothing I've seen before. Young Miss stepped forward, her eyes bright with excitement. We think this is the desk where Dickens wrote A Christmas Carol. The historical records match, and the dating tests confirm it's from the right period. As if responding to her words, the station's lights flickered briefly. He-Jin looked up in surprise. That had never happened before. The station's power system was extremely reliable. Environmental alert, the computer announced suddenly. Unexpected precipitation detected in Section 4. Precipitation. He-Jin hurried to a nearby screen. That's impossible. We're in space. But the camera feed showed something remarkable. In one of the archive corridors, small white flakes were falling from the air circulation vents. They looked exactly like snow. The desk. Ta-Wan said sharply. The energy readings just spiked. They all turned to look at the old wooden desk. The protective field around it was starting to show strange patterns, like frost forming on a window. Young Mai quickly adjusted the controls, but the frost-like patterns remained. We should move it to a preservation room, He-Jin suggested, trying to stay calm. The temperature controls there are stronger. As they guided the transport platform through the station's corridors, more strange things began to happen. The temperature dropped in random sections, creating patches of cold air. The lights continued to flicker, and He-Jin could have sworn he heard faint music coming from empty rooms. There's something else you should know, Captain Jai-Yun said as they walked. When we first found the desk, we discovered what looked like recordings embedded in the wood itself. Like the grain patterns had somehow captured sound from when it was being used. He-Jin looked at her in disbelief. That's not possible. A lot of impossible things have happened since we found this desk, Ta-Wan muttered, still watching his scanner. The energy reading suggests some kind of temporal anomaly, but that doesn't make any scientific sense. They reached the preservation room, its advanced systems ready to protect valuable artifacts. As they moved the desk inside, the strange frost patterns seemed to spread across the walls. The air grew colder, and for a moment, everyone could see their breath. Look, young Mi pointed at the desk's surface. Under the protective field, small spots of light had begun to dance across the wood, like stars reflecting off snow. The sight was beautiful but unsettling. He-Jin realized that his quiet archive station was about to become the center of something extraordinary. Whatever secrets this desk held, they were far stranger than anyone had imagined. The preservation room's monitors displayed a confusing array of readings. He-Jin and Young Mai sat at the control panel, watching as new data appeared on their screens. The desk, still protected by its energy field, stood in the center of the room. Ta-Wan walked around it slowly, holding his scanning device. There it is again, Young Mai said, pointing to her screen. The station's communication system had picked up another strange signal. When they played it through the speakers, they heard what sounded like distant voices and the scratch of a pen on paper. The sound seems to be coming from the desk itself, He-Jin observed. He adjusted some controls on his panel. If we clean up the signal. He pressed a few buttons, and suddenly the voices became clearer. A man's voice emerged from the speakers. Mr. Dickens, your publisher is here to see you. Another voice replied. Tell him I shall be finished shortly. This story must be completed by Christmas. Everyone in the room froze. The second voice had the distinct accent of Victorian London. Could it really be Charles Dickens himself? That's impossible, Ta-Wan said, but his voice wasn't as certain as before. His scanner was showing energy patterns that made no scientific sense. Wood can't record sound like this. But it is, Young Mai replied excitedly. Somehow, this desk preserved moments from when Dickens was writing A Christmas Carol. The wood absorbed the sound waves and kept them, like a natural recording device. Captain Jai-Yun, who had been quietly observing from the doorway, stepped forward. Can we recover more? He-Jin studied his controls carefully. The station's advanced systems were designed to preserve and analyze historical items, but nothing like this had ever happened before. I think if we combine the station's preservation technology with Ta-Wan's energy readings, we might be able to extract more sounds. They worked together, adjusting equipment and fine-tuning their sensors. As they did, more voices emerged from the past. They heard the scratch of Dickens' pen, the rustle of paper, and fragments of conversations. Sometimes they caught the sound of carol singers in the street outside his window, or the clip-clop of horse hooves on cobblestones. The desk isn't just playing random sounds, young Mai realized after an hour of listening. These are all from the time when Dickens was writing A Christmas Carol. Listen, you can hear him reading parts of it aloud as he writes. Sure enough, they could hear Dickens' voice testing different phrases, working out the words that would become one of the most famous Christmas stories ever written. But something else was happening too. The temperature in the preservation room kept dropping, and the strange frost patterns on the walls were growing. The station's computer reported more unusual snowfall in other sections, and the lights continued to flicker. The energy readings are getting stronger, Taiwan warned, checking his scanner again. Whatever this phenomenon is, it's growing. And look at this. The patterns match old descriptions of the aurora borealis, the northern lights. How is that possible on a space station? Fei Jin looked through the room's window at the space beyond. The ice crystals that always surrounded the station were moving differently now, forming patterns he had never seen before. It was as if the desk's mysterious energy was reaching out into space itself. We need to decide what to do, Captain Jian said firmly. These readings suggest something bigger is coming. The question is, do we try to stop it, or do we see where this leads us? That night, none of the visitors from the Star Chaser could sleep. The station's quiet halls echoed with strange sounds, and the temperature continued to drop. He Jin brought them all hot tea as they gathered in the main archive room, surrounded by the soft glow of emergency lights. I had the strangest dream, Young Mai said, warming her hands on her cup. I was a child again, celebrating Christmas with my grandmother. It felt so real. I could even smell her traditional cookies baking. Captain Jian looked up sharply. You too. I dreamed about my first Christmas on a starship. I was just a cadet then. She paused, considering. The odd thing is, I could remember details I had forgotten years ago. Taiwan nodded slowly. I also experienced something similar. A memory of building a snowman with my brother when we were young. He checked his scanner again. The desk's energy readings are affecting the whole station now. It's like it's creating some kind of field that interacts with our memories. He Jin sat at his computer, reviewing the sound recordings they had collected from the desk. Among the usual noises of Dickens' writing, they had found something new. Personal moments they hadn't noticed before. The author talking to his children, laughing with friends, discussing his hopes for the story he was writing. Listen to this, He Jin said, playing a newly cleaned-up recording. They heard Dickens speaking softly, as if to himself. Perhaps that's what Christmas truly means, not just the day itself, but the memories we carry with us always, the moments that shape us, that teach us to be better. As these words played, the station's lights dimmed and brightened in a gentle rhythm, like a heartbeat. The ice crystals outside the windows swirled in new patterns, creating shapes that looked almost like scenes from their memories. The station's AI is reporting something unprecedented, He Jin announced, checking his screens. It says the temporal readings around the desk are creating what it calls memory echoes, not just from Dickens' time anymore, but from all of us. Young Me moved closer to the desk, studying the frost patterns that now covered its surface. It's like the desk isn't just a recorder of the past, it's becoming a bridge between different times, between different Christmases. Suddenly, the station's speakers crackled with a new sound. It wasn't Dickens this time, but a mixture of voices. Children laughing, carol singers, sleigh bells, all overlapping like a symphony of Christmas memories. Look at the walls, Captain Jian whispered. The frost patterns had spread everywhere now, but they weren't random anymore. They were forming pictures, scenes from Victorian London mixing with images from their own memories. A horse-drawn carriage passed by a modern starship, Children in old-fashioned clothes played in the snow alongside astronauts. Taiwan's scanner began beeping urgently. The energy field is growing stronger. At this rate, it could affect the entire station by morning. We should consider shutting it down. But before anyone could respond, they heard a new voice from the speakers, Dickens again, but clearer than ever before. I have endeavored in this ghostly little book to raise the ghost of an idea, which shall not put my readers out of humor with themselves, with each other, with the season, or with me. The words seemed to hang in the air, and everyone felt a strange warmth despite the cold. The station's lights flickered once more, and in that moment, they all realized that something extraordinary was about to happen. The station's emergency alarms began to sound as midnight approached. He-Jin watched the main control screen with growing concern as red warning lights flashed across the display. The energy field from the desk had grown so strong that it was affecting every system on the station. All archive sections are experiencing temporal distortions, the station's computer announced. Temperature controls are failing. Emergency power activated. Taiwan rushed between different monitoring stations, checking readings on his devices. The energy field is creating what I can only describe as a temporal storm, he explained, his voice tense but controlled. It's as if different moments in time are starting to mix together. Through the station's windows, they could see that the usual scatter of ice crystals had transformed into a swirling vortex of snow and light. The sight reminded He-Jin of old videos he had seen of Earth's northern lights, but these lights seemed to show moving pictures within them, glimpses of London streets, snippets of Christmases past, and moments from their own memories. We need to make a decision, Captain Ji-Yun said firmly. If we don't shut down the desk's field now, we might lose control of the station entirely. She turned to her crew. Taiwan, what are our options? The engineer studied his readings carefully. We could try to contain the energy field by increasing power to the preservation room's shields. Or, he hesitated, we could let the phenomenon reach its natural peak. The readings suggest it's building towards something specific. Young Mei stepped forward, her historian's training giving her a different perspective. Look at the pattern, she said, pointing to the data streams on the main screen. The energy spikes are matching the timeline of when Dickens wrote A Christmas Carol. It's as if the desk is trying to recreate that moment. He-Jin thought about the book he had been scanning just yesterday, which now seemed so long ago. Dickens wrote the story in 6 weeks, finishing just in time for Christmas, he said. What if this is more than just stored memories? What if the desk is trying to show us something important? The station shuddered as another wave of temporal energy passed through it. The frost patterns on the walls were moving now, forming and reforming into different scenes. They could see a Victorian writing room, then a modern spaceport, then scenes from their own lives, all blending together like a dream. We have to decide quickly, Taiwan warned. The power systems can't handle much more of this. Captain Ji-Yun looked at each person in turn, her expression thoughtful. This was the kind of decision that could end a career if it went wrong. But something in the strange, swirling lights outside made her pause. The story Dickens wrote was about transformation, He-Jin said quietly, about taking risks to discover something wonderful. He looked at the captain. I think we should let it happen, whatever it is. The others nodded slowly, even Taiwan. They all felt it, a sense that they were part of something larger than themselves, something that connected past and future in ways they didn't yet understand. Very well, Captain Ji-Yun said. We'll see this through. But everyone needs to prepare for emergency procedures if things go wrong. She smiled slightly, and maybe we should all hold on to something solid. As if in response to their decision, the station's lights dimmed completely, leaving them in darkness broken only by the swirling lights outside and the soft glow of emergency panels. The temporal storm was about to reach its peak, and none of them knew quite what to expect. The temporal storm reached its peak at exactly midnight on Christmas Eve. The station's emergency lights cast a soft red glow over everyone's faces as they waited in silence. The swirling patterns of light and ice outside the windows had become so bright that it was like watching 1,000 northern lights dancing at once. Energy readings are at maximum, Ta-1 reported, his voice barely above a whisper. His scanning device showed numbers higher than he had ever seen before. The temporal field is stabilizing. Suddenly, the frost patterns on the walls began to move with new purpose. They flowed together like water, forming a clear picture in the center of the room. The image showed a small office lit by gaslight, where a man sat at a familiar desk, the same desk that now stood before them in the preservation room. It's him, young Maybrecht. It's really Charles Dickens. The scene became more solid, more real, until it felt as if they were looking through a window into the past. They could see every detail. The ink-stained fingers holding a quill pen, the half-empty cup of tea on the desk, the steam from his breath in the cold London air. Then something extraordinary happened. Dickens looked up from his writing, directly at them, as if he could see through time itself. His eyes were kind but tired, showing the weight of the story he was creating. He's writing it right now, Hejin realized. This is the moment he's finishing, A Christmas Carol. The vision expanded, showing more of the room. They could see the streets of London through Dickens' window, where snow was falling gently. Carol singers passed by, their voices carrying faintly through time. The whole scene was filled with a warm, golden light that seemed to pulse with the beating heart of the story itself. As they watched, Dickens dipped his pen in ink one final time. They heard his voice clearly, not through speakers this time, but as if he were in the room with them. And so, as Tiny Tim observed, God bless us, everyone. The words seemed to hang in the air, glowing with their own light. Then something remarkable began to happen. The temporal field started to pulse in rhythm with Dickens' words, and suddenly everyone in the room could feel what he felt as he wrote those final lines. The hope, the joy, the deep belief in humanity's capacity for change and goodness. Captain Jai-Yun gasped softly as tears formed in her eyes. Tai-1's usual skeptical expression melted into wonder. Young Mai reached out, as if to touch the vision, while Hejin stood transfixed, understanding at last why these words had survived for so long among the stars. The scene began to fade, but the feeling remained. The temporal storm gentled, transforming into a soft snowfall that somehow fell inside the station itself, each flake carrying tiny images of Christmases past and future, connecting all of time in a beautiful dance. The energy readings are harmonizing, Tai-1 announced, checking his instruments with amazement. It's as if the temporal field has found its purpose. It's not just showing us the past, it's connecting us to it, helping us understand it in a way we never could before. The station's systems began to stabilize, but something had fundamentally changed. The desk's mysterious power had transformed from a potential threat into something miraculous, a bridge between past and present, between Earth and the stars, between one heart and another. Christmas morning dawned quietly on Frost's library station. The temporal storm had settled into a gentle hum of energy that filled the station with a warm, peaceful feeling. Hejin sat at his desk, looking at the old copy of A Christmas Carol that had started it all. The station's systems had returned to normal, but everything felt different now. The ice crystals outside the windows still danced with tiny images of memories, and soft echoes of past Christmases could be heard in quiet corners. The desk, now permanently installed in a special section of the archive, had transformed the entire station into something new and wonderful. The latest readings are fascinating, Tai-1 said, entering the room with his ever-present scanner. He had decided to stay on the station to study the phenomenon, his scientific curiosity finally matching his sense of wonder. The desk isn't just preserving memories anymore. It's helping us understand them in entirely new ways. Young Ma, who had also chosen to remain, looked up from her work at a nearby console. She had been documenting everything they had learned, creating a new kind of historical record. It's like we've discovered a new way of preserving history, she said, Not just the facts and dates, but the feelings and experiences that make them matter. Captain Jai-yun had returned to her ship, but she made sure the Star Chaser would become a regular visitor to the station. The space authorities had designated Frost's library as a special research facility, recognizing that something unprecedented had been discovered here. Message incoming from Earth Historical Society, the station's computer announced. He-jin opened the communication on his screen and smiled as he read it. Other artifacts from Earth's past were being sent to the station. People hoped that the desk's mysterious power might help reveal their stories too. "I've been thinking," He-jin said to his new colleagues, "about what Dickens was trying to tell us in his story, about how the past, present, and future are all connected. Maybe that's what this place is becoming. A bridge between times, helping us understand where we came from and where we're going." As if in response, the desk's energy field pulsed gently, and new images formed in the frost on the walls. They saw glimpses of other stories waiting to be discovered: ancient scrolls, painted canvases, carved stones. Each one held memories and feelings that could now be experienced, not just studied. The morning report shows 3 new temporal signatures, Yum-mai announced excitedly. "I think the desk is helping us locate other objects with similar properties. It's like it's teaching us how to see history in a new way." Taiwan nodded, finally comfortable with the mix of science and wonder that the station had become. "The energy patterns are becoming more stable. I think we're learning how to work with them, not just observe them." He-jin walked to the window and watched the endless dance of ice crystals in space. Each one now carried a tiny piece of human memory, creating a cloud of stories around the station. He thought about all the books and artifacts in the archive, waiting to share their secrets. "Merry Christmas," he said softly, and somewhere in the gentle hum of the station, he heard echoes of voices from past and future answering him. The lonely archive had become a place where time itself came to share its stories, and the true meaning of Dickens' words lived on among the stars. In the years that followed, Frost's library became famous throughout human space. People came from distant colonies to experience its wonders, each visitor adding their own memories to the tapestry of light and ice that surrounded the station. And at the heart of it all sat an old wooden desk, still sharing its magic with anyone who took the time to listen to its stories.